Hey everyone, this is Elia, and you're listening to the Varieties Times. The episode you're going to listen to was initially released in 2020, September 2020 to be exact. I'm re-releasing it today because on June 14th, 2020, Sarah Hegazi took her own life. Sarah, for those who don't know, was a prominent LGBTQ and human rights advocate from Egypt. She was in exile in Canada when that happened. She first came under the public eye. And here I should say I'm reading from the episode that the Queer Arabs did back in 2020 as well. I will link it in the show note on Sarah, which I highly recommend as well. I'm reading their description because, to be honest with you, I don't think I could have put it any better. So on June 14th, 2020, Sarah Hegazi took her own life. Sarah first came under the public eye following the notorious September 2017 Mashrou Leila concert, where Sarah, alongside two friends, waved the rainbow flag, despite the shadow of a state that actively quelled all sexual freedom. For that moment, Sarah was unabashed in her identity as a queer woman. In the months following, the Egyptian state executed a mass witch hunt of hundreds of queer youth with the aid of the media propaganda machine. Sarah was arrested, tortured, and sexually assaulted until she fled Egypt for Canada 3 months later. In this episode that you're going to be listening to, I was speaking with Sinno. Hamid is the lead singer of Mashrou Leila. Mashrou Leila is, of course, the band that was playing at that concert where Sarah flew the pride flag. Hamid is themselves also queer, openly queer, and so having them on 4 years ago now was quite special for that. We didn't only speak about that Cairo concert, although of course we did. We also spoke about mental health, broadly speaking. Remember, this was in the context of the COVID pandemic as well. This was initially recorded in September 2020, as well as what it was like for Hamid to grow up queer in Lebanon, the country that I also grew up in. So with that in mind, the caveats here are, I suppose, pretty obvious. There are lots of trigger warnings that I can make throughout the episode, but I'll just make a general one now. We, of course, talk about suicide in the context of Sarah Hegazi. We talk about sexual assault, again, also in her context. It's the context of that story. And so with that in mind, please, be mindful of that. And otherwise, thank you for listening. As always, if you like this podcast and the associated projects that are now growing more and more under the umbrella of From the Periphery, you can support us on patreon.com/VarietiesTimes. By doing so, you will not only have access to all episodes from all of the other podcasts, not just the Varieties Times, but Obscurisan, Politically Depressed, an upcoming one called Khida, other upcoming ones as well. But you'll have access to our monthly hangout, in which we just chat with a bunch of other patrons, guests, co-hosts, and so on. An upcoming book club, which will happen at some point, I promise. It's just taking some time. Access to an upcoming zine, a bunch of other stuff that you'll get in addition to hopefully feeling good that you're supporting a what I'm hoping to be a worthwhile project. So with that in mind, again, thank you for listening, everyone, and take care.
My name is Hamid Zain Sinno. I am I don't know how to really identify myself. I'm a Lebanese American dual citizen, currently living in the States. I'm a first year grad student in an experimental music program at Dartmouth. I am currently living in Philadelphia for whatever period of time. I had moved to New York to get away from Beirut. But New York is unreasonably expensive, and the Lebanese economic crisis has taken its lovely little toll on me. So now I'm living here where it's a lot cheaper. That's my life in a nutshell.
As a Lebanese who is currently in a very expensive city of Geneva, I quite sympathize. So let's start with the obvious crap that we all have to deal with right now, which is the August 4th explosion. Tomorrow, we're recording this on September 3rd. So tomorrow will be the lovely 1 month commemoration and whatnot. And I know folks back home are doing stuff. Can you talk a bit about that day for you? You mentioned at the pre-recording that your mom was there and so on. And how have you folks been, your folks been affected by it?
Right. First off, I guess I don't really know how to explain this. My family is not, obviously my family is not just the people I'm related to, the social bonds that I formed when I was, I lived in Beirut for 31 years, basically. And the friends that I made there are very much my family. Luckily, I don't know anyone I don't directly know anyone firsthand who lost their life. I know a lot of people who were very severely injured. Pretty much everyone I know lost, either their homes or their businesses or both. A lot of those people were already in rather precarious living circumstances because of, again, the economic collapse that was preceding all of this. My mother was there. So when the explosion happened, the explosion itself was so loud that everyone thought that the explosion was happening in their neighborhoods because of how loud it was. So as soon as it happened, my newsfeed was littered with, these different reports about there being two explosions. Some thought that they were the kind of explosions that were happening in the 2000s again. So they made it sound like there were these sort of targeted attacks in their neighborhoods. Yeah. So I was reading a lot of, conflicting reports about where the explosions were. A lot of those reports were basically saying that they were in my mother's neighborhood, and I couldn't get a hold of her for the first 15, 20 minutes. So that was, I have no way to communicate like the amount of anxiety that produced and the kind of thoughts that were racing through my head. Luckily she's fine. She wasn't injured, and she managed to leave the city 2 days later to be with my sister in Dubai. So I'm very grateful, all things considered.
Yeah, and it was fairly similar for me. My family is mostly in Hazmi, Ashrafieh obviously was very badly affected. Yeah. And the rest, my mom and grandmother were in the mountains, so they're okay, although the building moved and stuff, but they're okay. But my mother, her stained glass workshop was completely destroyed, and a lot of the stuff that people were seeing, like the Sisi Museum and some of the churches and stuff, that's her work, the stained glass.
Oh God!
So that was that. Yeah, for the next 2 or 3 days, essentially, like August 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, or so, she kept on getting these videos and photos of her work basically just destroyed, and that was the moment it really hit me. I think that, and the story of those firefighters who were basically sent to their deaths, and that's something that when I saw that photo and the stories, and I think Sahar is her name, and those
exactly
those stories, that's when it really hit me. But for the most part, honestly, I do weekly therapy, and I've talked about this also on the last episode I did, which was with Lina Munzer a few days after the explosion. I don't think there is a proper way for me to fully realize what happened, just because I'm not physically there. It's really that simple for me. But other than that, it really, I guess the more political side of it is that it really feels that this was a point of no return in some ways, and it's the anger that I saw in the days later felt different. And I know this is something that we always say, and we said the same about October 17th, and which was true. It's not like we're lying or anything, but this just feels like even a different level of anger. The hanging nooses on the streets and that kind of thing. And I don't really know what comes next, to be honest. I am trying to rationalize it, and sometimes I put on my political science hat on, and I try and take some distance, and that fails like 5 seconds later. It's been an on and off thing. But the reason why I chose September, I asked you if we can do this in September, really is, it's because it will be 3 years since the Mashrou Leila concert in Cairo, which was on September 22nd, 2017. I have numbers in front of me because I'm bad at remembering things. And I will start with a basic question just to kind of get the ball rolling, I guess. And if you can talk for those who don't know, I'm assuming most people already know, but let's just assume they don't, to be kind to listeners. If you can talk a bit about the concert, sort of like the aftermath of the concert and what the band has been going through ever since in some ways.
Yeah.
I know that's not easy.
No, it's really not, especially for some reason. Well, for the obvious reasons, it's been a really difficult conversation for the last couple of months since Sada died. But we had a concert in Cairo 3 years ago, and it was the biggest concert we've ever played. It was truly magical. There were 35,000 people in the audience.
Wow.
At various points during the concert, we couldn't even hear ourselves playing on stage because of, the audience just singing along to everything. It was incredible. It was. I mean, I honestly don't know how to communicate what it feels like for an independent musician from Beirut, who, the band has had to deal with all sorts of hate from its inception, for the most part, I think because of my sexuality and my politics, but also just because of the kind of music that we play. So I really don't know how to communicate how exhilarating it was to just be on that stage in front of that many people and get that kind of, love from an audience. A couple of people in the audience, whether because they had felt emboldened by, the band's rhetoric, or because they were trying to show support for the band's rhetoric, for whatever reason, a couple of people pulled out rainbow flags. Obviously, this wasn't the first time something like that happened. It's also a non-issue. I realize how, symbolically that was a sort of game-changing moment for a lot of members of the LGBTIQ plus community in Egypt. But really, I mean, if you look at it, someone pulled out a piece of fabric, which is not a thing. The week that followed is basically, I guess, where the story kind of happens, which is that, pictures started circulating on social media of the rainbow flag being raised. And that was weaponized by Egyptian media and the state to sort of, evoke this moral panic that we've seen time and time again as a political tactic across the Middle East. So suddenly this concert with 35,000 people was turned into a satanic orgy of 35,000 people. And people started, posting these weird videos where they would allegedly describe what was happening there, the kind of orgies that were happening, how they saw demons, how they saw, just things that are completely absurd, things that really didn't happen. But, the internet is not really a place for truth, I guess.
I love how you had to say that this didn't really happen.
I mean, you'd think I wouldn't, right?
Yeah, I know.
Obviously, in the years that followed Egypt, I've had to time and time again. But obviously, the band got banned from Egypt. We were sort of dragged and destroyed by the press for things that weren't really true. And that's such a insignificant thing to really bring up, even because over 275 people were arrested in the month that followed, 75 of them in the first week. These people were arrested off of dating apps. So they were entrapped by undercover police officers who would go on these gay dating apps and set up fake dates with people to arrest them. They were, other people were sort of tracked down through social media. And one of the people who was arrested, a lot of them did manage to get asylum afterwards and leave the country, which, is not really a silver lining. We're talking about people who've had to be completely uprooted and, have had to renegotiate their lives now as immigrants, which is not easy for the simple task of attending a concert. But one of those people was Sarah Hegazi, and she was imprisoned for 3 months, during which she was repeatedly tortured. She was electrocuted. She was made to go hungry. She was sexually assaulted by police officers. She was also sexually assaulted by other inmates at the police officers' beckoning. She really got, I think, the harshest part of that concert because of a lot of things. One was, she raised the rainbow flag, but she was also a feminist. She was a communist. She was an anti-racist. She was involved in various kinds of political organizing. All of these things really scare governments like the Egyptian government. So they, punished her disproportionately. And she died by suicide a few months ago while living in Canada.
Yeah, on June 14th, for those who don't know. When that happened, I had heard of Sarah before, largely due to the aftermath of the concert as well. And there was this article that she wrote, I think, in Arabic on Mada Masr, I think, or Mada Masr published the translation later. I don't remember. Well, I'll find it and post it on a blog post associated with this episode on the website. But I don't know. I guess the way I reacted was in some ways like most people would know, I suppose. And there was also the additional personal link, I guess, which is, it's you guys, basically. The personal link was Mashrou Leila to me, obviously. For me, Mashrou Leila is, it's like my neighborhood band. I know it's kind of funny to say it this way, but, you were formed in 2008 at the UB. I started 2 years later also at the UB. And there was this kind of ridiculous, but whatever, like feeling of whenever, I went to 2 Mashrou Leila concerts, I think, in London at some point, 2015, 16, 17, something like that. I don't remember. Mm-hmm. And I would go with like some Lebanese friends and some non-Lebanese friends, and we would always be arrogant about it. Like, yeah, those are our guys from our neighborhood. Just this ridiculous thing. But this sort of brings me in some ways that I think you've talked about this in some other interview, because obviously I do my research. I try to do my research. Like the pressure of just representing, being openly gay, being from a Muslim background, being Lebanese, Arab, Lebanese American, Lebanese Jordanian American, etc., all of these boxes to tick, and having the reception that Mashrou Leila has. Like, I don't even know how to ask this fucking question. Like, what does that do to a person? Like, how do you deal with the burden, I guess, the mental health aspect? I know you are open about all of the mental health issues that you've been going through. So let's get into this a bit, if that's okay.
Sure. To be honest, I have not been very good about dealing with my mental health for the last year and a half, because mm-hmm. Obviously since I moved to the States, the economic requirements for having a healthy mental health routine are very different than they would be back home. But it's a lot. It's definitely a lot. I think I don't know. I was trying to explain this to a friend the other day, and mm-hmm. I found no like really healthy, really sort of adequate metaphor. Sorry, not healthy. I was trying to explain this to a friend the other day, and I couldn't find an adequate metaphor for it. But I guess one way of looking at it is that if you have like a plant, right? And you pour poison into the soil, the plant dies, right? And if you have a plant and you pour vitamins into the soil, the plant thrives. And if you take the same plant and you pour both poison and vitamins into the soil, the plant is still fucked, right? Like, it doesn't matter how much good stuff you can put in there. Once the poison is in there, it really takes its toll, right? And I feel like life in the public eye sometimes, especially as a, sort of queer or gender atypical, I don't know what the language is at this point, but being in the public eye has been a constant battle with, just recognizing the amount of love that the band has, and really appreciating all of that, and really appreciating, our I hate using the word fan base, because I don't think that's our relationship to our audience, but our support network or fan base or whatever you want to call it, really appreciating how they show up for us, the kind of love that they give us. But at the same time, like, the amount of hate is incredible. And, there's no two ways about it. That shit will fuck you up. Sorry about the language, but it is what it is.
It's fine.
It's insane. How do you even begin to talk about approaching a constant influx of hatred and death threats and satirical comments and being turned into a meme by homophobes 30 times a day? How do you look at these things and begin to think of a way to deal with that healthily, right? It's insane, right? It's also just sometimes, I think, recently, especially after looking at what happened to Sarah, a big part of which I think was her having to deal with the constant bullying that she was subjected to, and the constant harassment that she was subjected to. There's almost like this unfair expectation, I think, that we should find a way to deal with these things, when we really shouldn't. We have such a disgusting cultural problem in the Arab world that we're still okay with this kind of bullying. It's terrible. And I guess it's one of those things where, as is fairly common, a mental health problem isn't strictly a personal problem. It's a structural social problem, right? Because I really don't even know how to begin talking about bullying in the Arab world, or online harassment and homophobia and sexism in the Arab world, because what has worked in other places, right, has been to educate people on the repercussions of bullying, right? Has been to show a society how bullying can really destroy people, how it can lead to suicide, how it can lead to, unspeakable permanent hardship and trauma and complexes. But what we saw after Sarah Hegazi's death was that there was no remorse. Right? People celebrated that she died. People celebrated that she died as though it were a victory for them, because in a lot of ways, I think that's what they wanted. Right? So I don't know. I guess I'm veering off topic right now, but
no, it's pretty much on topic.
But yeah, representation is not something that I try to think about too seriously. I think it's not, it's not something that I want. I don't want to represent people other than myself, but I guess I'm in this position and I'm stuck with it. So the audience is going to have to deal with me, and I'm going to have to deal with them. And I hope we continue to show up for each other in that sense.
I had I went so far as to delete my Facebook account. I don't even remember how long it's been. 2 years ago, I think. Whatever. Part of why I did, I think I mentioned this before, but it doesn't matter. Was there was this? So I'm fairly involved when it comes to Syria stuff, And there was, for those who don't know, there's this imagery of the green buses. So the green bus is what the regime would send to, after some negotiation with rebels or whatever, to kind of, pretty much, forcibly displace people. And it just became this symbol. And someone on that side of the political spectrum, I'm using such nice words.
You mean like an Assadist?
Yeah, basically.
Okay.
Photoshopped my face on one of those buses. And it was just this weird thing because, so they had photoshopped my face alongside 2 or 3 other pretty random people that I don't really know, who I think the only thing about us in common is that they are, vocally anti-Assad. None of the 4 of us were even Syrians, which adds to the weirdness of it all. Right. And it just had this effect of, I tend to, my mind goes in weird places, and I basically obviously put myself in that bus. So I immediately pictured myself in that bus of what that would mean like, and so on. And because it came at a moment where it was right after the, fall of Aleppo, end of 2016. So that, I think it was like mid 2017. But anyway, it was, I was already out of Lebanon, and I do go back and stuff, but like I had moved to London at the time, and then Edinburgh, and now I'm in Geneva, all of like just following an academia route. And since, I was dealing with leaving, essentially with the concept of leaving home and whatnot, and already feeling kind of survivor's guilt that I have this second passport. I'm an Argentinian citizen, which allows me some mobility that obviously friends who only have the Lebanese passports don't have, and let alone Palestinian or Syrian friends or whatever. And that, it accentuated my survivor's guilt, if you want. That here I am, I actually can travel. I do have issues with borders, and I would have some problems and stuff, but for the most part, I'm exempted from it. And it just placed me in the single worst thing that one can imagine, which is those green buses. And well, for me at the time anyway. And so basically all what I'm trying to say is that when people think of, because I have had that question that I just posed to you, which is like, how do you deal with it? And the answer sometimes is I don't deal with it. There are definitely stuff that I probably like tools and tricks and stuff that I kind of know myself a bit more, and I would know how to stop myself in certain situations rather than go into this wormhole of online hate bait and all of that stuff. I do a better job at it now, in the sense that I don't get into them as much. I don't actually at all, these days. But that's not, I don't know if that's really a coping mechanism, or, I guess it is, but it's also like, I guess what I'm trying to say is that people need to understand that this comes out of exhaustion. It doesn't come out of, it's not like I felt that I was this hero in a story. I was actually, I'm very horrible with attention. I'm someone who likes to keep to myself. My audience, if I had the choice, would just be my dogs, and that's about it. I'm pretty bad at it. And so I'm asking you, I asked you this because one of the themes that I keep on changing of this podcast is just like the personal is political, which is just a way of inviting people in to talk about this, not that I necessarily have the answers. And I thought of you personally. I had, as I said, we were Facebook friends at the time, and there was as I mentioned, like the whole Mashrou Leila is my band kind of ridiculous thing at the time. So I would just follow some stuff, and when there was the Amman concert, the Cairo concert, the Byblos concert, I would follow it. I would follow these stories as sort of like, in some ways, also having to do with me, because in some ways, like the story of Mashrou Leila, and I'll stop rambling here and ask a question. The story of Mashrou Leila, to me, in some ways parallels my own, sometimes in a weird way, because it's, you know, you start in 2018, I turned 20 in, when the fuck did I turn 20? And Jesus Christ, I'm doing maths now, which is utterly ridiculous. I'm sorry. But like, I was 17 when you guys started. Yeah, so 2011, right, 2011. And so that's, you know, it's basically my 20s. It's basically my 20s is what I'm trying to get at. I'm 29 now. And the ups and downs and the way it sort of exploded at some point in a good way. I shouldn't say explode, I'm sorry. The way it, you know, whatever. There's no metaphor that's good. I'm really sorry. Yeah, sorry. The way it just came into the scene and became well known and whatnot. In some ways, there was a point of pride that was. It's not a patriotic, nationalistic pride. It's a recognition more than anything that my world was actually represented in that sense through the songs. And that other people in the Arab world, especially young people, were actually resonating with it, never stopped being weird, you know, in a good way.
I get that.
Yeah, because you know. Yeah, sorry. Continue. Go on.
I was just going to say that feeling has always been there for me as well. Like just not understanding how we managed to have an audience. Like that was, you know, essentially, and maybe this is some sort of internalized Orientalism or whatever, but the representation that we have of the Arab world, even from Arab media, right? Especially from Arab media, actually, makes it so that all of us have a bit of difficulties believing that there are progressives in our societies, right? We essentially always feel isolated and alienated in that sense, right? Because all we see in the media is what our political regimes want us to see, right? Which is these conservatives and traditionalists on the news and on talk shows and blah, 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 talking as though we all live in some sort of Scheherazade fantasy, right? And so it's funny, right? Because sometimes, you know, obviously a big part of what my job has dictated because of touring in Europe and America has been to sort of try to respond to how Americans and Europeans also represent the Arab world as being, you know, regressive and conservative and. But then that's also the representation that we get from our own people, because there's a political investment in producing that kind of image to then silence all progressive voices, right? So everything progressive becomes dismissed as this Western conception because, you know, we are not like that. This is not our way, which is bullshit. And in that sense, there's something kind of fascinating about, I think, the experience of having left-leaning politics in the Arab world, in that regardless of what someone's sexuality is, they kind of get a taste of what it feels like to grow up queer. And I'm not saying they're the same. They're not at all. I know that, of course. But just that sense of like, oh shit, I think I'm alone in these views and in what I tolerate and accept and in how I want the world to function. That sense of loneliness there's something inherently queer about it, right? And that so many people who are not queer or trans can experience that in the Arab world is remarkable. But unfortunately, it still doesn't produce the kind of solidarity with non-heterosexual communities that you would expect to come out of that. But anyway, that's another story.
No, I definitely relate to this. I'm you know, straight and cis, and I never really understood why growing up. I was sort of like attracted towards, if that's the word, I don't know, but like queer writers. So like by now it's well known to people who follow me that I have this obsession with James Baldwin.
Oh, bless you.
just everything about him makes me happy in a good way.
Right.
I don't know how that could be in a bad way, but because so some background here. I took a class in London that was called something like The Amazing James Baldwin, such an amazing title. And it was done at this Black Cultural Center. And it was like once a week we had to read something, watch something, whatnot. It was like in the aftermath of that documentary, What was it? I Am Not Your Negro, it's called.
Yes.
And so there was some I guess the increased attention towards his world and whatnot. And even before getting into his books, when I started watching his videos obviously there's so many of them on YouTube. I was just like, I don't know, entranced by the way he talks and the way it's like, I don't know how to describe James Baldwin, which by now I should probably. But yeah, I did have that growing up, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And I discovered, Baldwin himself, I discovered him later on, but there was this sort of sense growing up that I'm different. And the difference was sort of accentuated, obviously, at school. I was bullied a lot. I can't roll my R's, which is hilarious in Arabic. And, anything would make you stand out as a kid. So that was something that people would pick up on. And I guess it marked me in some ways. I don't want to just have a therapy session here, but it just ended up being this thing where by the time I reached university, or like the last year of school, when basically Mashrou Leila started becoming a thing around us anyway, in the local scene. I'm saying like I knew you guys before it was cool. And and yeah, like when that started happening, it just clicked. And in some ways, I actually remember when I started listening to the music, part of me didn't believe it because it doesn't fit. As you said, like you're actually made to believe that there is only one way of being Arab, of being Lebanese, of being whatever. Growing up in that part of the world, I grew up in Lebanon as well. There's only one way of being, really, or at best, there's like 2 or 3 ways of being. That's really just one way of being. Yeah. And at best, you might have a different way of being, but Christian or Muslim, that's or maybe Druze, that's as far as it goes. And I'm talking about like conservative versions of it. Right. And when I started seeing Mashrou Leila's song, hearing the songs and reading the lyrics, and I started discovering some other indie bands that, kind of either came out of Mashrou Leila or preceded Mashrou Leila, or like at the same time as Mashrou Leila. And there was kind of this aesthetic that I started really being attached to. And it never stopped until like fairly recently when I guess I matured a bit, but it never really stopped at that point from feeling like this is an exception, and this is the problem really, is that we were made, as you said, like we grew up to feel like we might accept some diversity here and there, but only as exceptions. Right. Only as, there's that band and there's that singer and there's that model and whatnot. And they're just individual acts. And we might tolerate them because we're a liberal society, as we like to tell ourselves in Lebanon. And that's really the extent of it. We tolerate it in order to, I'm talking, the government level, to show this image of Lebanon. And when that sort of stops being useful, I guess, is the example of last summer. What was it, August 2019, when the Byblos thing happened?
Yes.
Yeah, August. Yeah, actually, yeah, as I said, I have the dates in front of me. August 9, 2019. Wait, sorry, you said you left about a year and a half ago. Was that related to it?
I actually left a couple of months before the concert in Byblos happened. To be honest, it had sort of just been building for a long time. And, before the concert cancellation even happened, there was just a lot of harassment. Like if I had a couple of incidents where I'd be walking down the streets and someone would spit on me because they recognized who I was, or I'd get cursed at by a total stranger at the bar. Um, back when, back when I was still drinking, I guess. It was starting to be a lot. And then when Egypt happened, it's almost like, it's one thing to live in a place and what you actually experience in a place, but then there's also the part that exists entirely in your head, right? Like there's your lived experience in Beirut, and then there's the part of your lived experience that has to do with how you imagine yourself and how you imagine the rest of the city.
Yeah.
And something about what happened in Egypt just kind of made me want to leave the entirety of the Arab world for a little bit. And I felt like I just needed to be in a place where I wasn't going to have to fight the same fights every day. Like, it's not that it's boring, it's that it's exhausting to have to keep talking about LGBT rights every day, every single day, right?
Yeah.
For the most frivolous of reasons, right? It's not like, it's not like I'm whatever. It doesn't matter. It was starting to be too much, and I just wanted to leave and try to take some distance to get better. To be honest, my mental state by the end of my time in Beirut was, I don't even know how to begin to explain to you what that was like. I think there are things about it that are probably hard to believe for anyone who hears this, but for, about 2 or 3 years, I literally did nothing. I would wake up and kind of stay in my pajamas all day. On a good day, I would exercise, and that would be my accomplishment. And that was it. I wasn't writing. I was beyond, it wasn't standard anxiety. I am someone who has lived with generalized anxiety disorder my entire life, but this was a whole other ballgame. It was just constant fear of impending doom and just completely being immobile. Like I was just at home doing nothing for years, unless I was on stage. And that was the only time that felt okay. It was my only happy place. And I kind of just didn't want to live like that anymore. And so I moved to New York. And then, within months from me leaving, that stuff happened in Beirut.
Yeah. Just cemented it, basically.
It did cement it. It also just really did away, I think, with my last, there's this conceit that we have as Lebanese people, or rather this conceit that we are raised with about Lebanon, that most of us don't believe, right? And we will say that it's not true. This Lebanese myth that Lebanon is more open than the rest of the region, and that, we are better off and luckier, and that our political system is not as tyrannical as our neighboring countries, yada, 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 yada. There's all these things, this bullshit, right, that we believe. And even if you, sort of unpack that intellectually and recognize that it's false, a part of it stays there in your head for the mere fact that you grew up with it. It's the first thing that you learned about Lebanon, is this bullshit about the Paris of the Middle East and East meets West, whatever the fuck that means. And, this myth of Lebaneseness not being like other Arabness, right? And that kind of was the last, it did away with the remaining parts of that mythology that I didn't even know I still had, but apparently I did, and they were destroyed within the 2 weeks that month, I guess, that whole debacle took place in.
Yeah. No, yeah, I know exactly what you mean. I'll ask about like the stage being a happy place in a sec. I wanted to, just to add on what you just said. I initially left in, and I mean, people who've listened to the podcast already know this, so I apologize in advance to those who already know this. But I left in end of 2015, in September 2015, just to do my studies. 15, and that was in the middle of the Tret Hadcom stuff, like the Youth Think movement.
Yeah.
And I was one of the organizer, although on a kind of low level, and so I felt very guilty leaving. And I had told myself as soon as I left that, it's just a 1-year master's in London at SOAS. I finish what I have to do and then I go back. And that was genuinely the plan. But like halfway through experiencing London, feeling this might sound ridiculous to some people, but I think you'll get it, is that what was really different for me about London compared to Beirut wasn't even the Londonness of it. It's not even the diversity of London. I mean, that was amazing and that was cool, and that definitely brought some joy in my life. But for me, what was really different about London is just the fact that there were benches, like you can sit somewhere.
Of course.
It's something that there is this cemetery. For those who don't know, the UK has this weird thing about cemeteries that actually they can be quite nice. And there are benches there and people sometimes do picnic there and whatever. And so there's this small cemetery next to the dorms I was staying in, next to King's Cross, between King's Cross and SOAS. There's this small cemetery. And I would just stay there for hours and do nothing for hours. And it almost felt like I was just compensating. I was just compensating for 24 years, it would have been back then, of just not having that. Because as a fellow Ayoubite or whatever the fuck we're called, the bench, when we think of the bench, like the Ayoub benches.
Of course.
Yeah, and that's the extent of it. And
of course.
Yeah, it was I understood later on, and now we're obviously 5 years in since I initially left, and I've been leaving for 5 years is what I basically realized recently. Right. And it's not that I necessarily tell myself that I will never go back. It doesn't even enter the calculations really. I just know that I had to take a step back because I had reached my limit. It was really that simple. I had told myself this story of like how useful I can be, and I can do this. I can do some media journalism or whatever, and I can report on the ground stuff and talk about some underlying issues in society that other people may not want to do or whatever. Like there was this purpose essentially. Right. And until I realized at some point that for the most part, I can still do this from abroad. Right. And the thing that I was not getting, these things that I was sacrificing essentially, was the thing that I actually needed, which was just the bench. It's so stupid, but it really is.
It's not stupid at all. Yeah. It's really not stupid at all, Joey. Like, when look, I think in a lot of ways, the similarities that you and I have with each other have a lot to do with sort of and I hate saying this, like a generational cultural shift. Yes. And I'm not someone who sort of like inherently like who necessarily believes in these things as cross-generational, but I think for the most part, there's something to be said about people who grew up in Lebanon and didn't have to live any part of the actual civil war, right? Where I grew up hearing about the war and then being, sort of just being led to believe that fixing the country could be what is my responsibility and could be done, right? And there's something about just being in these spaces where there's a bare minimum of institutional support for your life that is almost necessary when you're dedicating your life to fighting for these things, right? If you spend your life writing about society and politics and government failure and social failure, at some point it becomes exhausting that you don't see anything actually changing, right? And there's so much value in being in a place where something as basic as a park bench or just a public park or any kind of public space, just being able to access these things for the mere fact that you are a human being and that's what humans need, and you also happen to pay taxes to this institution that's supposed to be producing these spaces and producing producing this infrastructure for you to survive, right? You know, like the absurdity for me, for example, with New York, and this is hilarious, is that a lot of New Yorkers constantly complain about the New York subway,
of
right?
Course, yeah.
And it's trash. It is filthy. It is a privatized institution, like everything is in the US because of this country's bullshit economy. And it is ill-tended to. But just thinking about how, as a Lebanese person, part of what you pay taxes for is money that goes to a fictitious railway company for a train system that hasn't been in operation for decades, right? But they still get so much money and have around, well, I don't remember the exact number of employees that they have, but they have a bunch of people that are employed that get monthly salaries for a company that doesn't actually exist, right? And that's something, right? I literally like count my blessings every time I'm on a New York subway and all I can smell is, you know, urine on this filthy train that hasn't been cleaned in God knows how long. And it's just like, okay, cool. We didn't have that back home, so this is a fucking blessing.
Yeah, Londoners complain about the tube a lot as well. And
because it's a nightmare.
And I just, yeah, for the most part, I never cared. Like if it was 7 minutes late and 15 minutes late, I was like, well, you guys have a metro. I don't care. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, it exists.
It exists. Its very existence to me is something that's good. And so, yeah, anyway, it just became this joke essentially with between friends who I did make quite a lot of Lebanese friends in London as well. And we would take the tube and we would have non-Lebanese friends with us going to university or whatever. And it was always this thing. They would always be surprised, obviously, until they just got to know us really of why this really mattered. But yeah, just to go back to, you mentioned before the stage being sort of a happy place. And can you talk a bit about this? I have zero experience of a stage. At the most I've done in terms of public anything was like some panel in which like the audience would be like students or whatever, and there would be like maybe 100 people at best. And I would very rarely be the only person talking anyway. And so, so what, I don't know if you, so I'll just ask it this way. Like what's that like? And how is it, like, are you just different on stage than off stage? And if
of
yes,
course.
So you just answered yes. So how?
Okay. So here's the thing. In my off-stage life, I guess is the right word. I don't know what the right word is, but in my off-stage life, I am not someone who's, very confident. I'm actually extremely insecure to a fault. It's something that I was trying to work through in therapy, and then I stopped therapy. But I'm a mess. I grew up feeling very inadequate and being told that I was inadequate at every corner. I also grew up with severe ADHD that was not understood by my educational system. So then I was made to feel even more inadequate, blah, 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 blah. But then when I'm on stage, it works on multiple levels. The first is that no one is in the audience to see me, right? They're there to see some idea of what quote unquote rock star is like, right? And it's a fantasy, and I get to pretend to be someone that honestly, in a lot of ways, I wish I could be. I wish I could be the kind of person who, I would never be able to sing at a dinner party, right? I would never be able to sing at a park, right? I would never be able to sing in these places where I'm supposed to just be my social self, right? I would be mortified. Honestly, like I'd probably start crying out of fear, and it's happened before. I'm not gonna lie, but when you're on stage, that's not social, and I'm not being myself. I'm being the singer from this band who is putting on this performance of, you know, I'm performing being a rock star, right? And it's almost like you get the relief of doing everything that a therapist tells you shouldn't do, which is I get to spend 2 hours not being myself. And for a bit, it feels like, you know, I don't know if you've ever had this feeling, but at when my depression is at its worst, all that I want is to just be able to pause myself and to just not be for a bit, right? I just want everything to pause. I want life to stop. I want myself to stop. I just need a break. And being on stage gives me that for 2 hours, right? And it's incredible. And then I guess the other way that it works is that, you know, I suck at a lot of things. I really do. I'm terrible at a lot of things. I can't do science. I can't deal with abstract math. There's just so much that I can't do, but I know how to do stage. And on some level, I think everyone has this where you get a pleasure from knowing that you're doing something right.
Yeah.
And it's strictly an ego pleasure, right? but for people who generally struggle with self-esteem, being able to engage with something that you know you're good at is incredible, right? And you get to forge these connections with an audience in the weirdest ways. Like, you know, there's a bunch of, like, a few thousand people in front of you, and you somehow need to find a way to create a bond with them within the first 10 minutes of a concert, right? They need to understand a bunch of things about you and a bunch of things about what it means for them to be in that space. And you try to win them over. And then once you win them over, that's it. The rest of the concert is just love in both directions. You fall more in love with the audience as the concert progresses, and the audience falls more in love with you as the concert progresses. And it's magic. It's honestly, like, I don't know how to explain it. It's absolute magic. It's a break from the social contract. It is a break from your own subjectivity. It's a break from all your sense of inadequacy. It's a break from all your paranoia, because your paranoia becomes completely justified, right? All that, like, fear that you have when you're walking down the street about, oh shit, are these people looking at me? And then you're punishing yourself for thinking that people are looking at you when that's clearly just your own paranoia. When you're on stage, it's true. A few thousand people are staring at you, right? So as horrific as that is, as mortifying as that is, there's a pleasure in knowing that it's real, right? Like, everything you're paranoid about is actually happening. And for some reason, that makes you feel safe.
Yeah, I think I actually get that. Okay, so maybe it's not the same, but I muted myself for a sec while you were talking, because I was laughing at remembering this thing where I had given this. I was on a panel a couple of years ago to talk about masculinity in the Arab world, very light-hearted topic, and it was like at a sea or something, I don't know, but it was in London, and there was a audience of 60, 70, 80 people, not that big, but some of them knew me from, like, Hummus for Thought or, like, online presence or whatever, and others didn't, but it didn't really matter. And so I was on a panel and we talked and whatnot, and I was fine. I'm usually fine in these situations because, like, I know what to expect. It's not a round circle. It's not it wasn't recorded or anything like this. I knew what the rules of the game were. And when I know them in advance, I'm more comfortable with it. After that same evening or the next evening or something, with the fellow panelists and other people who I was invited to go to that person's house, and there were some other people and whatnot, and essentially was just asked by that person to just redo the panel or just, like, talk about it again. And I just froze, and I didn't know what to do. And because I had to stand and that's one thing I don't like, standing. I'm a bit tall. I'm too self-conscious about it in a small space, and I become just completely my mind goes into sensory overload. Right. And I just don't know what to do in that moment. And I forget which language am I supposed to speak, even though it's like London, everyone was speaking English. And it just became this thing. So I guess I see what you're saying, although it's just scaled up, I suppose. That's I can see that, and it is a relief. But like, when was? I mean, I just remember that there's COVID-19 going on. But when was the last concert, I guess? And do you have any idea when the next one would be?
I have no idea
No,
when the next concert will be. The last concert was, I think, if I'm not mistaken, it must have been probably around Christmas time.
Okay.
Like ballpark December, I'm going to say. We have not played since. I don't think concerts will resume anytime soon.
No.
And sort of like I said earlier, I'm starting school in a couple of weeks.
Okay.
So touring is going to be, I think, a little difficult for me. I think the whole band at this point just really needs to chill for a bit.
Mm-hmm.
It's been so rough, Joey. It's been so fucking hard for the band for the last 4 years. It's just been one fucking crisis after the other. And yeah, I think the only healthy thing for us to do right now would be to sort of just go on hiatus for a bit. But we'll see.
And where are they? Where are the other three members? So
Haig is in New York.
Okay.
As well. And actually, speaking of Haig, I should say we were supposed to have a concert in Zurich, I think a week ago. And the concert organizers did this thing, obviously because everything is canceled because of COVID. They organized these things called listening parties, where basically instead of us doing a performance, we sort of curated a set list of our songs and of recordings of other live performances. And we put them together with a lot of sort of just talking in between the songs about, our life, where we're at, what we're doing, what the band's history is, what, the crisis in Lebanon has been like, what the songs are about, whatever. And so they play these things in these public spaces where, let's say, 300 people can get together and be socially distanced and just listen to the same thing together at the same time, which is kind of an interesting, I guess, approach to music after COVID. But I will say that Haig, I don't know if that recording is going to be available online at any point. I really hope so, because he was talking about the stage as a happy place, and he said the most incredible stuff. I'm not going to paraphrase it, but it was incredible. Sorry, again, that's off topic, but Firas and Carl are still in Beirut.
Okay. Okay. We're roughly around the hour now. I'm not sure. Is there anything you feel like we could have talked about that I haven't really approached, or something you just wanted to get off your mind? Whatever, just go for it.
No, really. If there's anything else you want to ask about,
I'm bad at this thing that I decided to do for some reason. I don't know why I'm doing a podcast, but
actually, you're pretty good at it.
Oh, thanks. You don't listen to the first episodes. No, even the first episodes were fine. There was some audio quality issue. I'm not sure. I will end because I wanted to. Okay, no, I actually do know what to ask. We talked a bit about how the both of us growing up in Lebanon, there was this sense of, to put it very mildly, unease. And what helped me, let's say, what I kind of escaped to was a few books and some movies that I would just obsessively rewatch like an idiot, and which was basically Lord of the Rings and a few other stuff growing up.
Yeah.
And kind of the fantasy world, sci-fi world.
Of course.
That helped a lot for me personally. And then when I still do a bit of that, but when I discovered the more Baldwin world, let's say, the James Baldwin types, now I put myself on the spot and need to remember names that I'm obviously forgetting. That helped a lot as well. Are there, so for you, was it books? Was it music? Was it kind of both? Let's talk a bit about that, if that's okay, kind of to sort of wrap it up.
It was both and other things, if I'm being honest. I'm someone who is like a compulsive escapist.
Mm-hmm.
So,
I get that.
Books growing up, music. I think I'm still like that. I can be a little unhealthy about it. Like I will go on a TV bender for a week and not do anything but watch TV and eat cereal, honestly. And that's the shitty part about being a musician, is that you're self-employed and you're on your own time. So you can make time disappear sometimes.
I'm right.
And I do that. Yeah, I do that. I'm still very much into fantasy film, and it's not even like I will watch anything with any kind of superhero or any kind of superpower or anything with witches. At some point, I guess when I was 17, I came across Rabbi al-Medin, and just escaping into his world, even though he was writing very realistically about my real world, right?
Right. Yeah.
There was just what his books offered me is the ability to escape into the presence of his voice. I don't know how else to explain it, but there were no queer like role models around me at the time. And even though he was writing about the world that I was probably trying to escape, he was writing it as someone who felt like they resembled me. And so that kind of escapism was just incredible. And I devoured and continue to devour anything he produces.
Yeah, I get that. I had that with, as I mentioned, like Lord of the Rings was my big thing. I did get into the Harry Potter books when I was younger, before Lord of the Rings.
We all did.
Yeah, we all did. At some point, I had a David Attenborough phase. I would watch a lot of wildlife documentaries. There's all in, I think, as also like you said, it kind of, it never really went away. I wouldn't say that I kind of found a system that's necessarily better or whatever. It's just sometimes I have a system, or I think I do, that sort of functions for some time, and then stops, and then I find another one, and then in between two systems is when the chaos happens in my mind.
Right. I don't know, if I'm being honest with you, I've had to at this point, that's the thing with escapism, is that sometimes it's the only way to process things, but then sometimes it can also be like very unhealthy.
Absolutely.
This sort of immediate reflex to just want to escape whatever uncomfortable situation. Obviously, there are situations that you can't resolve, at which point, engaging with escapism can offer like temporary relief while you figure out what your next steps are. But for me, I think, especially when the band started to get famous, the stress was so much that I sort of just wanted to obsessively escape every second of my life, and so I started drinking and partying a lot, and that became a problem. And I think there's like honestly a direct line for me between Harry Potter and a drinking problem, very, very seriously. So I've been sober for a few years now, and it is a constant. Honestly, it's a constant battle trying to learn how to just like be present when shit goes down, how to like actually confront some problems. Like I still have a tendency to like, whenever my boyfriend and I fight, for example, I shut down and I need to just be quiet and not talk to anyone for like 24 hours, right, before I can like actually deal with a problem. And it's not healthy.
No, the only thing I would say about my way of doing things is that it's it gets to a point where there are certain things that I basically tried and I know that it doesn't work anymore. And I'm not going to say that I'm completely immune to it or that I wouldn't kind of get back down. So for example, one thing that whenever so I mentioned I left in 2015, but I would still go back a lot. So there would still be a lot of months of my life, essentially. I was, in October, I was there. I came back. I came into Geneva in January, for example. Those 4 months, for me being in Lebanon, can be so overwhelming that I would just smoke a lot. And I'm not a smoker. I actually hate it. And I hate it even more when people around me are smoking. But yeah, it just became this thing because it would be my escape, essentially. I mean, I guess that's what many people do. I don't do that when I'm here, for example, in Switzerland. And I don't do that when I'm with friends or with someone else, or if I'm doing something, if I'm kind of immersed in the moment or whatever. I don't do that. And I haven't, and I think I won't anymore. I feel like it's one of those things that doesn't really stick anymore. And it's actually a bit weird, or I guess it's not weird, but when I would kind of go into these moments of like, I would be smoking or whatever. When I mean smoking hash. And I would feel guilty about it. And it would kind of defeat the purpose. Like, you're supposed to be escaping and you're feeling guilty while escaping, which is, you're supposed to be escaping from guilt. And yet it was this vicious circle until I got to the point where I just told myself, basically literally talking to myself, like, listen, it's fine. You're clearly doing this because you don't feel good. And if it makes you, I'm not a proponent of drugs, by the way, but like at that time, it was something that I felt was helping me. And I had just gotten to a point where I knew that this will be temporary. And I told myself that, listen, this is temporary. It's fine for now. Allow yourself to be not good. Like, allow yourself to not be perfect all the time, because that obviously was part of the guilt. And it just got to a kind of an equilibrium, I guess, where I had just accepted. And through that acceptance of my flaws, if you want, or like temporarily accepting them, I actually smoked less. It just got to the point where I was actually progressively phasing it out, really, until I replaced it with other stuff that are healthier, which is just watching TV series that are sci-fi, like Star Trek is something I'm into, and that kind of thing. And
that is fascinating.
Yeah, I think it works. I mean, it worked for me. I'm not sure.
I mean, it's fascinating because sometimes when, I guess the point of escapism, maybe on some level, is that it offers you a way to deal with a problem without actually dealing with a problem.
Yeah.
Right. So it's not always like, oh, cool, I'm going to do this thing that makes me happy. Sometimes you do something that makes you feel like shit, but it's just another, like, it's like you're dealing with what you're actually feeling, but you're doing it by proxy. Right. So you feel guilty about smoking, but it's easier to deal with that guilt than to deal with your other feeling. Right. And if you just like accept your sense of inadequacy about something, or like cut yourself some slack about like, okay, cool, this isn't going to be perfect, then you're kind of dealing with whatever else is giving you anxiety by proxy. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It just went. I went through ups and downs, let's say. And for me, 2015. I mean, for Americans, I guess 2016 would be the Trump stuff and Brexit stuff for the Brits. And I did see the latter. I was in London when Brexit happened. It's been
I was in London when Trump won.
Oh, were you? I was there as well.
Yeah. I was staying with a friend of mine who is originally American. I was staying with him and his partners. And it was surreal because when we went to bed, it was still like,
they were still counting
early.
Yeah.
And we were under the impression that, Clinton was going to win. And I was at least, I would have been unhappy either way with that election at that point. So I was like complaining about Hillary. And then we woke up to Trump winning and it was surreal. I was walking through like East London, like not believing what the fuck had just happened. Basically, it was terrible.
I was up. I stayed up because I'm an idiot. And our flatmate, I was already with my partner, and our flatmate is this nice Hungarian guy, and he went down to smoke. I went down with him without smoking, but I just went down with him, and I was on my phone, and they announced the result. It was like 4 a.m. in the UK or something. And we just looked at each other and we just said, fuck. That's the only thing we said. And yeah, being off topic, but there is no topic. That's what I was saying when I'm saying that this podcast can be a bit random, but it does its job. It does its purpose, I guess. And people who listen to it seem to be enjoying it. So that's a good thing. And
great. Well, thank you so much for having me.
No, man, my pleasure. Honestly,
this was lovely.
My pleasure. I'll just I guess I will just end there. We'll end on the fun note of Trump and Brexit. That's always a good note to end on.
It's surreal that is a light note at this point.
But yeah, thank you for your time. Good luck on what's next. I'm sure we'll keep in touch. And take care.
Cool.
Thank you.
Thanks. You too, man.
This has been another episode of the Fire These Times. If you like this podcast, please consider leaving a 5-star rating or review on whatever podcast app you're listening to this on. And if you really like this podcast, head on to patreon.com/firethesetimes. That's patreon.com/firethesetimes. The Fire These Times is a media ecosystem based in the Periphery that supports a bunch of media projects including this one. For $5 a month, and even less if you opt for the yearly subscription, you can help this ecosystem grow and get early access to all episodes of the Fire These Times, Politically Depressed, Obscuristan, and Khida, as well as an invitation to join our monthly hangout, watch parties, upcoming book club, as well as exclusive episodes. Thank you for listening, and take care everyone.